Not the official proceedings, but two apologies I'd like to make. One is for Lord Denning, who, although he very much wanted to be here, he found it literally absolutely impossible. I know he regrets very much that he can't be at Family Day. Our only saving grace at St. Cecilia's is the fact that he's coming to officially open the home for us tomorrow.
Hello.
The other apology is that much as we would like to have had patients from the other homes, as you'll see, we are a bit cramped for space. And therefore we had to say, we're very sorry, we can't have you. That doesn't mean that they're excluded from Family Day. And I'd like to make it quite clear that in point of fact, they are part of the family. I think I'm right there, Leonard. In fact, the most important part of the family. And so what we've done to try and bring them in is to have what I'm saying and what the rest of the speakers are going to talk to you about today broadcast or relayed into St. Cecilia's so the patients can hear what is being said. Well, now, having said that, you'll notice on your program that there's no mention of an official welcome. It's only a very short day, and there's an awful lot that we want to talk about and we want to discuss that is of importance, and we felt that it was wrong to waste a whole lot of time in a lot of unnecessary opening speeches. So I'm going to only spend 2 or 3 minutes talking to you before I ask the GC to start the ball rolling. And in those 2 or 3 minutes, there are 3 points I'd like to make. The first is to welcome you on behalf of all of us at St. Cecilia's very sincerely, and to thank you, many of you, for coming long distances in order to play your part in making this a successful Family Day. In the past, we at St. Cecilia, some of us, have been down to other Family Days, particularly St. Teresa's and Staunton Harold, and we found when we came back, not only had we made many new friends and renewed old acquaintances, not only had we learnt an awful lot which we've been able to implement by putting into our own home here, but we came away particularly with a tremendous boost to our pride in this wonderful family and in our leader, the GC. I hope that today you'll make new friends, you'll renew old acquaintances, and doubtful perhaps, but perhaps you will learn something from what you see at St. Cecilia's. But I think the most important thing is, and I hope that we will entertain you in such a way as to make you go away renewed in the pride of this wonderful organization and in our founder. The second point is this, that we don't flatter ourselves that you come here primarily to see us. I think that if that was the case, the whole object of Family Day would be missed. I'm sure that every one of you here has come today because it's the one time in the year, the one day in each year, when we can really demonstrate our loyalty and our affection for the GC, and as an expression of our gratitude for what he is doing for others. I think, too, that although some people might think it's a great trouble to come long distances or to have to prepare meals for a fairly large gathering, that sort of thing, I think, too, that some people might imagine that it was an awful trouble and one had to put oneself out an awful lot to do it. Well, I don't know whether that is the case or not, but if it is, a jolly good thing, because in point of fact, it demonstrates all the more how much we are grateful to Leonard for not only what he's doing for the sick, but what he's doing for us in helping us to look after them and to live better lives. Now, the third thing, and I hope I'm not going to be flung out when I mention this, but it seems to me that every home must strive to attain perfection. I think it's right, because only by doing that can we get the best for our own patients. At the same time, I think it would be a pity if this was done at the cost of the group, the movement as a whole. Every time any of us go to the central foundation, whether it's the English one or the Indian one or any other one, every time we go to them, we are asking them to give us some of the strength that they so urgently need to progress with this work. Every time they give us any of this strength, we are sapping them and we are delaying them in the growth of the work and the helping of more people. If nothing else comes from this day at St. Cecilia's, this family day, I would like to feel that it was remembered as the family day on which every member of every committee, of every home, resolved that for a year they would do everything in their power not to call for help from the Central Trust. I know it's not always possible, but if you resolve it to do so, then there are times when you'll say, oh, well, we'll get over it ourselves this time. And the other thing is that just before I am chucked out, in case nobody is doing that, then to go on and make another resolution to write to the Trust and to tell them that you are willing, each one of you, to help in every way you can in furthering the extension of new homes and looking after sick people. In that way, I think we are doing our job properly. We're not only looking after our own little band of residents, patients in our own homes, but at the same time, we are in fact giving ourselves and encouraging and helping those who can expand the work, because we can't, to do so. Well, now, I leave that thought with you. If you feel, any of you, that you would like to take those resolutions, no need to write to Miss Mason about it. Just do them and act on them yourselves. I'm sure she'll soon know. Well, now, that's all I've got to say. GC, may I now ask you to open the proceedings? Before I do so, again, I extend a hearty welcome to you all, and I hope that you'll find that it hasn't been a waste of time coming. I know that we want to hear from the GC as to what's happened in the last year and as to what plans there are for the future. I believe that the plans are as exciting as they've ever been, either faced by the Trust in England or which the Trust in India have had to face. GC.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bob told you that there's a relay on the end of this microphone. I don't think he's told you that there's a tape recorder on the end of it too. And it's most appropriate because I first met Bob and Peggy over a tape recorder, didn't I?
Just switched it on, all right.
I first met Bob when I was lying in hospital at the mercy of the nurses and doctors, not allowed out of my room, and I got a letter out of the blue from a little boy, Richard, asking something. I forget what it was. And as a result of it, Bob and Peggy came down, and that started our friendship. It started a whole series of tape recorder work. I used to record peculiar messages from the sanatorium, and he used to drive around London in the bus playing them, didn't you, Bob? To any unfortunate passerby I might happen to be coming. And before long he said he thought he would like to start a home. Well, I don't know that we gave him very much encouragement, but Bob isn't the person who gets put off by lack of encouragement. So very soon he came along and said he said he had a house. He only wanted £5,000 and he could buy it. He wouldn't take no for an answer, and eventually he talked the hospital authorities and letting me have a couple of nights off, was it, Bob?
I don't know, was it?
And I came up and I saw this house here, which didn't look as it does now. So he formed a little local committee. I don't know where the money came from, but anyway, a deposit was paid, a loan was raised from the bank, I think, and the house was bought. And so while I continued lying in bed in hospital for another year, St. Cecilia's grew and thrived, and today, as you know, it has a £21,000 extension, and a very big future ahead of it. So St. Cecilia's was a turning point in our short history because, as far as I was concerned, it was founded by merely having to give in to Bob's repeated requests for a home. I merely just had to say, all right. And today is also a turning point in our history, as you will find out later on, and therefore it's most appropriate, in my mind, that we should be here at St. Cecilia's on this, our 4th Family Day. It's actually a moment that I've been waiting for a long time, a very long time. Partly because it is Family Day, and although every day I try to come round the different homes in spirit and try to picture what you're doing and how things are going, it's not quite the same thing. And this is the one day in the year when we are all together in one place. And we do have representatives from practically all the homes all over the world, except, I think, unfortunately, Singapore. And then we very nearly did have somebody from there. In particular, we have a very strong contingent from our first Indian home, Bombay. We have Lady Duggan. You know about Lady Duggan because at the last Family Day you were told the story of how the Bombay home had started from nothing in an open field under a tree, and how the ladies had had their first committee meeting and said, we have 7 patients and no furniture and no nurse and no money, and we don't own the property, and nobody in Bombay knows us. What are we going to do? Lady Duggan remembers that moment. And she'll remember that one of the ladies got up and said, my husband will put on a pantomime. And that was wildly acclaimed by all the ladies present, at least those that had ever heard of a pantomime. Some of them hadn't. But Nina Carney had then to go and break the news to her husband. And she decided she would wait for a convenient moment. But the convenient moment didn't come. And at the next meeting of the management committee, it was suddenly announced, with Jimmy Carney, her husband, in the chair, that Jimmy Carney was going to put on a pantomime. And it was the first he'd ever heard of it. But he rose to the occasion. He didn't say anything then to his wife. And he duly put on this pantomime. He had a homemade script, a homemade stage. He collected actors and actresses from all over Bombay, and Lady Duggan, Gina, gave her garden. And her garden is one of the most beautiful gardens you could imagine, particularly for that purpose. It was all sort of framed in trees and cut hedges, and just exactly perfect for 650 chairs. So the pantomime went on, and it made £3,000. And it went on again last year, and it made another £3,000. And Jimmy Carney, who organised it, is missing because he's been posted to Indonesia. But nonetheless, the pantomime is still going on. And we have Mrs. Robinson here, who knows all about the pantomime. She did all the dresses and I don't know what else last year. And so we must take the occasion not only of welcoming them, but wishing them all the best next Christmas when it goes on again. I can't go all the way round the homes, much as I would like to, and tell you the story of each one of them, how each one has had its own little way of doing exactly the same thing, and has overcome its own difficulties in its own particular way. But the story of Bombay stands as a symbol of them all. And looking round the room now and seeing you all conjures up memories of the struggles that you've had, and some are still having, to build up a home from nothing. But in building it up, we do, of course, want to keep our mind on our objective and not lose sight of that. And our objective really is twofold. The first objective is wherever we get a request for help, and we can see that it's a genuine request for help, and that there's nowhere else that he can go, reasonably go, not to turn him away. And that was the principle on which the homes were founded. It has its difficulties, because once a home is full and running and so on, one can't crowd it up to the hatches. If one did, the people living in it wouldn't be very comfortable. But nevertheless, there stands at the door somebody who has turned to us for help and hasn't anyone else to turn to, and therefore we must help him. In the same way that a mother, if her child is in need, will never consider her shortage of money or her own state of health or anything else. She'll only consider the needs of her child. And that is what we, between us, as best we can, must do. And today, as you will know shortly, has a particular significance in that direction. Because over the past few years, it's been difficult to take every deserving case. In fact, we haven't. I think that still today, in spite of the 15 homes and the 4 others that are being built, we turn away very nearly 1 application a day through shortage of space. In England, of course, they do have somewhere else to go. It may not perhaps be quite what they want, but at least they do have shelter and care and nursing. But outside the shores of England, that's not so. And there are countless thousands of people who literally have nowhere. In Dehradun, where we're trying to build up a large home to be a model for the Far East, the other day 2 people were walking along the road 100 yards away from the home, and they found a boy in the hedge. He was starving. He was so weak that he couldn't move, and he was deaf and dumb and blind and covered with sores. And they picked him up and they carried him into the home, and there he now lives. His sores are gone. He's big and strong. In fact, a bit too big and strong, because he won't do as much work as perhaps he might do. But he's been given a home and he has a family. But had the home not been there, I don't know what would have happened. There's another little girl there of 7.5 who has TB glands and also polio. And she was found abandoned outside the hospital. And the hospital took her in and gave her some treatment for her TB, then said they couldn't keep her, she must go. And if there wasn't a home for her to go, she would be put out somewhere on somebody's doorstep to be looked after. And later this morning you'll hear stories of other people in different circumstances, quite close to us, whose need is similar. And so between us, as best we can, we want to try and set out and help them all. But of course, it's not enough merely to take somebody under one's roof and give them shelter. What we've got to try and do is to give them the opportunity of living their life. Now, we all know that we each have our own individuality, our own personality, which we want to express. We have our own way of doing little things, and it's very frustrating if we can't do it in quite the way we want. But when one's disabled, one's dependent upon other people, and therefore one can't do it in the way one likes. It's very frustrating. But more than that, that feeling of being dependent on somebody is in itself upsetting, because we like to feel a measure of independence. And so the whole idea of our homes is that those who come to live in it will be given the opportunity, so far as they can, of leading their own lives. They have a full life ahead of them, and they want to live it as we want to live it. And so today, later on, we're going to discuss that particular problem. We can exchange our ideas and gain inspiration from each other as to how best to go about it. Well, since the early days, when we took those first patients in, the work has expanded a lot. In those days, in the first Lee Court, we had every type of patient, infectious and non-infectious, mentally backward and not mentally backward, ex-prisoners, all sorts. Of course, the days come when they can't all live under the same roof, but as the homes are expanding, we're providing homes for each of the different categories. Since our last family day, two particular things have happened. We have started in England 2 homes for the mentally incapacitated, those who are not in need of active treatment but are not well enough to stand on their own feet in the world, and also for poor little children who are mentally backward and can't look after themselves. And it looks as if there's as big a scope in this field for the mentally backward as there is in the work we've been already doing. And so we do wish Wimbledon and Dorchester the best of luck in this big new venture, both of which homes, I'm sure, will be a pilot scheme for many others throughout the country. The other expansion has been overseas. You know that we're fairly well established in India. We're well established in Singapore, thanks largely to the volunteers from the RAF who've built a beautiful home from a few crumbled walls, all free of cost except the price of the material. Miss Mason has been to Lebanon, and she spent 10 happy days with Barry Richards, I think, at the time of the revolution. And they found several properties, pictures of which are up here, one of which has been given, and there's a little local committee. The chairman of the local committee has been over to England, visited Lee Court, been very impressed, and gone back full of fire and energy and determination to start up. Wilfrid Russell has been to Nigeria in the course of his business, and he stirred things up there. We had a doctor come in yesterday from Nigeria, anxious to start. They not only want to start one home, they want to start 2 simultaneously in different parts of Nigeria. And Wilfrid goes back there next week for another visit, and it looks as if before long there will be something starting there. As a result of Margot's visit to Lebanon, St. Cecilia's the other day had a visit from Dr. Zakaria. And Dr. Zakaria comes from Syria, and he's in the process of building a large hospital, privately, from his own money, for 120 beds. So he's come here, seen St. Cecilia's, and I think I may say very impressed, so much so that he now wants us to start a home in conjunction with him in Syria. So perhaps all this will be the beginning of a big expansion throughout the Middle East, particularly as the Irish Society of Kuwait have been raising money for us and are sending in £200 a year and wish to do a lot more for the Middle East homes. That brings me to the biggest expansion of all, into Poland. You know something about it, but what has happened is this. 18 months ago, somebody, am I allowed to give her name?
Yes.
What?
Yes.
Mrs. Stevenson, whose husband is warden of Lee Court, came up and said, you must start a home in Poland. Well, that's not the sort of thing one can say, yes, certainly I will. Anyway, we said we would do what we could, and we began investigating it as opportunity occurred. Wilfrid went to America, and he got the support of some of the Polish people in America. Then when things began to develop a bit, we thought, well, if it comes to the actual start, who can do it? And after a lot of thought, we decided there was only one person in the country who could do it, and that was Sue Ryder. Sue, we'd known Sue for about 2 years then. The displaced persons in Germany that she helps, and about which you're going to hear a lot more, she used to bring them over to Staunton Harold and other homes for holidays. And so eventually we asked her if she ever had an opportunity of going to Poland, whether she would see what could be done. So in May of this year, she took her little car, Alice, is that right? And she drove in through Denmark, over a ship. I mean, she couldn't go in through Eastern Germany. I don't think she had any introductions there, and nobody prepared the way for her, and she disappeared for 2.5 weeks. And at the end of that time, she emerged in Czechoslovakia, where I think Alice broke down. Are you going to tell them that?
Well, I didn't get this.
Alice broke down, and she was standing beside it wondering what to do, when along came a contingent of the Russian army. So she stopped the contingent, and she told them that Alice had broken down, and the contingent stopped their march long enough to get Alice going again. And so here we have Sue back. Well, during that time, she'd managed to engineer a meeting with the Ministry of Health and put the problem to them. And so far as one could see, the Ministry of Health agreed that it would be a very good idea, that there was a great need for this in Poland, and that they would welcome any help that was given. And so on September the 2nd, she and I went together to see how things had got on. We had this meeting on September the 3rd at the ministry, and I think I may say that after a couple of minutes, Sue took charge of the meeting and conducted all the operations, with the result that the Deputy Minister of Health who was there couldn't have been more friendly, couldn't have been more helpful. He said, we are in great need in Poland. We have great shortage of beds, because after all, practically all the hospitals were destroyed in the war, and we desperately need help. And so an agreement was signed with the ministry the following day, whereby we were to found 2 homes in Poland on land given by the ministry and with help provided by the ministry for the incurably sick. The first for those suffering from rheumatoid arthritis, and the others, I think, to be decided later. The home was to be managed by a committee appointed by the Ministry of Health with 2 representatives appointed by us. Well, the question then was, under what direction this should be run. And so after a number of discussions between Sue and our trustees and myself, we mutually decided the thing to do was to form an amalgamation between herself and all her work and her many hundreds, thousands of supporters and us, and that we would found a new foundation bearing her name and ours, with a specific task of working behind the Iron Curtain insofar as we could, and of helping those people who don't come under the category of the homes, people who've been out of prison and so on, people whom we all want to help but don't actually belong to the homes themselves. So that really is the biggest development of this year. But when you have heard Sue speak about her work, I know she won't talk about herself, but anybody who knows Sue can't help being caught by the infection of the way she goes about her work. I don't suppose she's ever turned anybody down in the 12 years since the war who's come to her for help. I don't suppose there's anybody else who manages to pack quite as much into a day as she does. And I've just been to Germany for 6 days to see her work. And on the 4th day, having had by anybody's standards what you might call a busy time, and during one of which nights she, while I went to bed, spent the whole night driving down to Hanover to pick somebody up who actually wasn't there. On the 4th evening of this tour, we were suddenly told that we've got an appointment at 10:30 in the morning in Munich. Well, Munich from Hanover was 520 miles. So we get into the car, which isn't Alice, but it's Elijah this time, it's a bigger one, and off we set. We cover these 520 miles during the night, and we get there at 10:30, and we do the day's work. Well, in order to get here today, Sue has had to drive from Munich through 2 days and 1 night. She landed yesterday afternoon with 3 paralyzed patients whom she's giving a holiday to, drove down to Suffolk, installed them for the night, cooked them their supper, and drove up this morning to be here, and she'll return the same journey this evening. So, in joining with Sue, we have gained a new inspiration and a new drive. And today is the day on which we, so to speak, formally announce our amalgamation, and which I publicly, and in the name of all our helpers and patients all over the world, thank Sue for having joined forces with us, and I look forward very much indeed to a whole new sphere of activity. We're now to come down to practical points. This home that's being started in Poland is very urgent because winter's coming and they have nowhere at all to live. So we have ordered 2 prefabricated huts, very beautiful ones, from Wolverhampton. The firm is 100% behind the project. They're going to get them manufactured and complete by November the 1st, delivered on site immediately. They're sending their best engineer to supervise the erection of it. They're determined that it'll be not only a credit to the foundation, but also to British workmanship. We've got to equip that with beds, sheets, wheelchairs, everything under the sun, because they have nothing in Poland. And so I wonder whether you can look round your attics, look round your friends, and see if there's anything in the way of equipment that you could give Sue by the middle of November. And in doing that, I wonder whether, in various ways, you can help all this overseas expansion. St. Teresa's is helping by starting up an organization you know of called HAM. It's the Amateurs Wireless Operators League, whereby they keep in touch on wireless all over the world. And their idea is to try and link all the homes together through this means. We can talk to each other and pass messages. And maybe in every home, each home in turn can find some way of helping the poor people outside the shores of England who are in such need. And what we learned from going to Poland was this, that when it comes to the relief of human suffering, to helping those who are helpless, there is a fundamental, complete solidarity between us all, which transcends the differences of nationality and politics. The Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs in Poland sent for us on the last day of the visit and said that he wished to thank us formally in the name of the politicians. And he said that he was thankful at last to be able to discuss something which was not controversial. We have received an offer of help from the Russian Minister of Health in money and kind for the Indian homes. And that offer of help has a full approval of the Foreign Office here in London. So that whatever we can do in our small way to help the cause of the sick and the dying and the homeless throughout the world will, I'm sure, do something towards understanding amongst nations. So today, our family day, when we come together as members of one family scattered about the world, perhaps we can make that good resolution. So I've come to the end of my few words. Bob is going to introduce Sue Ryder. Just remains for me to wish her and you a happy day together, and to thank St. Cecilia's and Bob and all those with him with all my heart for such a warm welcome and so many arrangements to make us comfortable, and to congratulate him on that beautiful £21,000 wing, all of the money for which St. Cecilia's has raised or found entirely by themselves without any help from the Trust.
Ladies and gentlemen, I got a note at the top of my pad, nonsense. That means that the first part of Leonard's talk, referring to St. Cecilia's, is, of course, as you all know, nonsense. This home, like every other Cheshire home, would never be in existence without him, and I'm sure I'm right in saying that. The other thing is that, oddly enough, what he has said today, I had no idea he was going to say. And I do feel that, having heard of the plans for the future, that we can't but make that resolution that I suggested to you at the beginning of today's affairs. I think that there are so many people, as Leonard has said, outside Europe or outside England who need help, that we really must try and do more than our little bit in our homes. Well, now, about 4 months ago, somebody, not to do with the Cheshire organisation at all, almost forced me into reading a book. I've been fairly busy, so have we all on the committee at St. Cecilia's, and we haven't had much time to read. But I was so impressed by the way this friend of mine said that I must read the book that I bought it. It's a book called But Some There Be. I didn't know what it was about, but as I started to read it, I found that my blood pressure mounted and mounted, until towards the end of the book I really had to put it down and put it to one side. The book is about displaced persons. And I regret to say that I, like I think a lot of people, don't realize the dreadful state that exists among these people in Europe. People who 10, 12 years ago were our allies. They were fighting not only for their own lives but for our lives. And yet thousands of these people are just put away in the gutter, completely homeless and left just to rot. I say completely. There are a few people who are helping, and one of the people who are doing a wonderful work among these DPs is Sue Ryder. Now, when I read the book, I had actually heard of her because I'd met her for about 2 minutes up at Staunton Herald about 4 years ago. And I remember at the time asking Leonard who the girl was in one of the offices at Staunton, which had just been started, who spent her time bashing away at a typewriter from 7 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. And I'm not exaggerating. All day long, whole of that weekend, she was banging at this typewriter. And I was told that she was having a holiday from her visits to Germany. Well, it didn't register anything then. I completely forgot about it until I read this book. Well, Sue is going to tell you of some of the work she's doing. I know she won't tell of her real part in it. We have arranged for some of the books that was written. This book that I mentioned just now, it is really the story of Sue and her work among the DPs. We've arranged to have them down here. When you've heard her story, I would suggest, and I'm not trying to sell them, that you, if you can, get one of these books and read it. I think that it will give us encouragement in what we are doing in our particular Cheshire home. I think it'll broaden our outlook and remind us that there is an awful lot more to be done other than just in our little home, and I think it will help you to make that resolution and to really go out to help the foundation and to try and make certain that these plans are a success quickly, because the quicker they are a success, the quicker these people who so desperately need help can be helped. I'll say no more except to ask Sue, after thanking her very much for coming such a long distance, overnight and over day. I'm sorry that we put her to this inconvenience, but thank her very much for coming. And Sue, now if we might hear from her.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a very great privilege for me to have been asked here today, and a great pleasure to be able to come. I have heard not only about this home, but indeed of all the other homes that are scattered about in England and now in different parts of the world. I've also had the honor of visiting one or two of the others. The time has crept on very remarkably, which leads me to say that I don't want to keep you here any longer than I'm sure you want to be, and to try and put into a few moments, to tell you in these few moments something about the work that has been going on since the end of the war in Europe. Now, everybody surely here has heard about refugees. It's a title which we dislike and we're rather tired of. We are apt, I think, the main to summarize them by thinking that they are just homeless people scattered about the world whom large organizations help. We may not pause sufficiently to think back from where they came from, who they are, and why they're still there. And it's been my great privilege, both during and after the war, to have worked with and amongst them. Not just with refugees, but with people who mean much more than that to us, because they are our forgotten allies. People who've just been referred to as those that risked everything in the Allied cause during the last war, and who have since been abandoned by the rest of the world. Today it gives me the opportunity of mentioning them and bringing them, so to speak, into the circle and into the family which indeed they belong to, just as much as any other person in any other country does. They are, these forgotten allies, mostly those who were prisoners of war and shared all the privations and discomforts with our own people between 1939 and 45, and the survivors of the German concentration camps. That brings me to a point here which I'm often asked about. Is it necessary to be told again of what went on in Buchenwald and Ravensbrück and Auschwitz and Dachau, to mention only a few of the main concentration camps? The Cheshire people have realized the horror that's been inflicted during the war years, and they want to forget it. And the last thing on earth is they want to be reminded about it. Now, I think there's a very strong answer to that. Firstly, very few people realize to the full the amount of suffering that went on in those camps. Indeed, what went on before they even entered into them, when they were captured and tortured and spent months and years in Gestapo prisons. And do we realize the extent that the extermination was planned and carried out? That, for instance, in Auschwitz alone, which I visited and had many, many friends there, between 4 and 5 million people were killed. Ordinary men and women and children of all ages and professions, and from all parts of Europe and indeed the world. That for years on end, 25,000 people were literally exterminated each 24 hours. And that is just one camp. I think in respect to those that died in those places and suffered in silence, because at that time people certainly in England didn't realize what was happening, we owe them such respect and sympathy that it is the very least we can do now to see that those who survived those places of torture and hell on earth at least looked after and helped in the best possible way. There are very few survivors now. So many have died since 1945. But it is up to us, I feel, wherever they may be, to go on trying to help in whatever way we can, because nearly all of them are in great need still. You've heard, I'm sure, of the big organizations that took care of these millions of people after the liberation in 1945. There were relief teams, the Red Cross and the Quakers, UNRWA, later IRO, to mention but a very few of scores of people and committees and societies that rushed out to Europe to try and help. Each of us working out there then, as field workers, were told that we had to follow certain policies. I was fortunately with an organization that paid no attention to creed or color or religion. Rather cramped by certain rules. But we did see the terrible faults that took place all the time and the mistakes that were made as to what to do with them. Everybody said at first, in ignorance, that they should be repatriated. What they didn't realize was that the majority of them had already suffered at some time, particularly the Russians, under the Soviet regime, and were very much against going back and facing another form of terror. They'd lived through it. They'd then experienced the Nazi terror, and they were against going back and suffering all over again. But there was forced repatriation, which was later acknowledged to be a great mistake. There were waves of suicides. People changed their names and nationalities in order to dodge this forced repatriation. And there was little that we could do except to give comfort and help wherever possible during those first days. It also equally appalled me, and I'm speaking now in the first few weeks and months after the liberation, of the comparative ignorance and the casual, callous attitude that so many others had, partly, I think, because they didn't witness the scenes, towards the thousands that were dying anonymously in the woods and along the roadsides, in fact, in every imaginable place. One didn't have to enter a concentration camp to see what had happened in Europe during the war. And they died in their scores, only to remain anonymous, to be abandoned and passed by, without anybody pausing to think who they were, that they were just human beings who had every right to live just as much as anybody else had. There were some of us who were trying to help, though it was indeed very inadequate, because, as you can imagine, with thousands and thousands of these people milling about, lying all over the ground in advanced stages of illness and disease, that only most elementary help could be given, and if possible, then they were brought into hospitals, if they were still alive. It struck us then that this should never, never reoccur, that each of us as individuals should try and see that it was the last time that the world should face such appalling suffering. Unfortunately, we haven't advanced very far since then. But perhaps there are people who are more conscious of what happened, and who now at least would register dismay and try and stop it, or at least go out and help relieve it, if such a situation occurred once more. Well, for the next 7 years, the forced repatriation stopped, and the problem, as it was referred to, was discussed at Geneva, Washington, and so on. Nobody knew what to do with them. They were the unwanted people of the world. And then commissions came to interview them, select them, and decide whether they could go to their countries. When we heard about the commissions arriving, we thought rather naively, well, this is going to be the answer. Everybody, of course, will be taken. The old, the disabled, the blind, and the sick. And you may imagine the horror and dismay when, as it became almost immediately apparent, the commissions and the consuls were only interested in those who they considered were suitable for hard manual work, and who they wished to consider were 100% fit. All sorts of difficulties were thrown up. There were pre-war immigration laws were exercised, which were completely out of date and tune with the circumstances. People were told who came from some remote part of Russia or Poland or Yugoslavia that they had to produce their birth certificates, and they had to fill in forms of 69 questions giving information about their great-great-grandmother, whether they'd ever been mental, before they were even allowed to be considered as an immigrant. And the people who had been arrested in the churches and the markets, on the streets, or literally as active members of the underground, could hardly produce any of the things that the commissions demanded of them. And so resettlement in any form to any country became extremely difficult. Nevertheless, as the years progressed, over 1 million of them were resettled to different countries overseas. And then in 1951-52, we were told we'd reached the bottom of the barrel, that the rest of them were to be referred to as the hardcore and left. They were to be handed back to the German authorities, who would take control over them, that their national schools and kindergartens would be closed, and that they would remain as forgotten people in Europe, and certainly unwanted. The large organizations withdrew. They rushed off to Korea and other countries. It seemed to me then to be utterly wrong, firstly, that they were not all taken out of Germany, which was the country responsible for their suffering, and secondly, that we should just leave them there. Leave them to their fate, because people of over 45 with a profession had no chance of getting a job, that the majority of them were sick, mainly with TB, and that those who had suffered in the concentration camps were refused compensation by the German government, despite the laws that had been passed to the contrary. They should receive £15 for every month that they spent in a concentration camp. I merely mention that fact because it shows all the more that the help we give them is so necessary, and that they are still, unfortunately, partly dependent on our help and other charity. Well, since 1952, they've been left there, and they're still in these camps and hospitals. Their own hospitals were closed down, and the patients are scattered throughout the length and breadth of Western Germany. They are very lonely. They often don't speak the language, and they're not understood, and there's discrimination shown against them by the German doctors and nurses. There are various projects which I have tried to start, which perhaps gives some form of relief, and their whole standard of living has improved, partly because of immigration and because so many of them have died, and it therefore makes more space in the camps for the others. There's not the same overcrowding that there was, for instance, a few years ago, when there would be 5 or 6 families in an ordinary sized room without any privacy at all. Well, those are the people who we refer to as the forgotten allies. They are nearly all of them sick, and because of their sickness and because of what they suffered in the Allied cause, they are there today. As one of them referred to it, they still are waiting, sitting in the waiting room, wondering what is going to happen to them next. And as another one said, you may imagine what emptiness there is in the spirit when one sees nothing ahead. And you've heard already from Leonard this morning of what we're going to do for those, particularly the survivors of Auschwitz and the other concentration camps, on the other side of the Iron Curtain, those that happened to be liberated there, and who are in great need of every form of assistance. I don't want to go into any further details as to what we hope to do and the expansion that we hope to make for them, not only in Poland, but perhaps eventually in the other countries too. It's very difficult for us, I think, to realize just what the conditions are like there. When I went this year for the first time, it reminded me very much of Western Europe in 1944 and 45. The needs are so great, and if a person even is healthy, he can only earn enough to buy himself a pair of shoes for a month. And his whole total wage goes in buying one pair of shoes. So you may imagine that for those that are sick and can't work, what the needs are. I am sometimes asked, surely the problems of helping these forgotten allies, and indeed others behind the Iron Curtain, should be left to the governments of the world. These problems should be decided by the United Nations. That it's not for individuals or groups in this country to get up and talk about them, or even to raise support. I'm told that it's quite wrong, that the days of that sort of thing are past, and that it must really be left to the governments. Because one thing, their help would be much more effective, that it will be on the right footing, and so on. You know, in England, that the welfare state does not answer all the needs. I can only say, as a very humble field worker, that one has seen over the 14 years vast organizations backed by the income of over 30 nations and one comes always back to the same conclusion, that it is the people who as individuals started to do this work or similar work on a personal basis that the real good was achieved. There are several people who over this past century stand as really shining examples in one's mind. And one of them was Ard Nansen after the First World War, who did so much for the relief of suffering in Russia and the famine. And the second person is Count Folke Bernadotte of the Swedish Red Cross, who I had the great privilege of meeting. Now, he was ridiculed and talked about, and people said he was mad, but he still went out and accomplished his mission, which unfortunately met such a tragic end when he was assassinated in 1948. When he worked, he did things himself, and he actually negotiated with Himmler during the war and took his ambulances in to the concentration camps where nobody else was even allowed to enter. And it was through his initiative and personal enthusiasm that he rescued no less than 42,000 people of different nationalities from those concentration camps. He drove the ambulances and he went into those huts where people were dying every moment of different illness and disease, and he lifted them out and brought them away to Sweden. The majority of them died, but they left the concentration camps with the knowledge that this man had been sent to them to rescue them from those hells and to restore their faith in human beings. It was very moving meeting many of them who had been rescued by Count Bernadotte. And it is certain that he was somebody rather chosen to cope with work of that kind at the end of the war. And that, I think, always makes one believe, through seeing and being with him, of his tremendous work and the plans that he had for relief work in all countries, all over the world, that one is so convinced that where there is human suffering and need, nothing should stop us from going in and doing it. That no matter what people think of or have political beliefs in, those things should not stand as barriers, that there should be no frontiers. And we have those examples, and we should, as a result of them, be able to go forward. We've greater opportunities now than even he had then, and perhaps more understanding. And with faith and this belief that everything is possible where human beings are in distress, I'm quite convinced that any mission would succeed. And finally, we remember that no man is an island entire of itself. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it would be quite out of place for me to add anything to what Sue has said, or almost even to thank her, particularly as she is a member of our family and we a member of hers. So I'll just announce that we finished our meeting this morning, and that I think St. Cecilia's have some refreshment and so on for us, and we all go outside and have some refreshment and then lunch. Thank you very much.